I am then very interested in our age. It is a peculiar age. For some, a marvelous age. For others, a catastrophic age. The question then is, what age is this? When did it start? What are its origins? Let me begin by giving one possible description of the singularity of our age, and then propose a bracketing of this era in history. Perhaps I might begin with the explosive technological advancement which only seems to grow exponentially. By the 19th century, advancements in physics and mechanics emerging out of Europe had skyrocketed in such a manner as to make them unparalleled in our known human history. And still, subsequent and even recent advancements seem to us now as antiquated, outdated, in a society whose logo is new and improved, and whose conveyor belt of new and exciting gadgets have ever-shortening shelf lives. For example, the famed physicist Michio Kaku states that when you receive a birthday card in the mail, it often has a chip that sings for you, "Happy Birthday." Remarkably, that chip has more computer power than all the Allied forces of 1945. Hitler, Churchill, and Roosevelt might have killed to get that chip. But what do we do with it? After the birthday, we throw the card and chip away. Today, Michio Kaku says, your cell phone has more computer power than all of NASA had in 1969 when it placed 2 astronauts on the moon. Video games, which consume enormous amounts of power to simulate 3D situations, use more computer power than the mainframe computers of our previous decade. Advancements in the field of biotechnology, bioengineering, neuropsychology, nanotechnology have entered a phase which we would have described not long ago as science fiction. To give a few examples.
And I've watched the politics of the United States for my whole life, and I'm 68 years old. The first election I voted in was 1972 with George McGovern as a candidate against Richard Nixon. And I grew up in the days of the Vietnam War, and that heavily formed my opinions about things. And I can say nothing like this ever happened in the history of the United States. And basically, the monstrous office of the presidency, which has been created and expanded by the system that rules here, they lost control of it, if briefly, but they lost control of that, and they lost control of the narrative. And this indicates a kind of incipient political crisis and political disintegration that is going to happen and is going to transform the earth shortly, but hasn't yet befallen quite.
Asked to speak about a contemporary issue, Muslims in an age of Trump, I begin by going back in time. We Muslims have to take a broader view of history than is proposed by the title of this talk. We can't think of an age in 4 or 8 year cycles, or in 5 or 10 year plans, or mere election results. That is myopic. That is a view of human history so narrow, it can't possibly grasp at the bigger picture. Our view of history would still not be complete if we expand our time frame to national histories. Because what is a nation? What is a nation in the mighty flow of time? Nations, fleeting as they are like human natures. They possess good and bad in various proportions and form qualities. They can shine like ornaments reflecting light, and they can descend into the dark desire for earthly immortality. The Pharaoh, with whom Moses spoke on behalf of God, was an example of this. The age we find ourselves in is not an age of Trump. Trump is a man. True that he sets into motion specific and harmful causes and effects. Trump presents specific historical problems and makes necessary certain forms of action. He can reflect the best or the worst of his day and his nation. He can affect policy and enable and disable certain norms. He can incite violence, panic, protest. But after all, on a spiritual plane, he will one day answer for only his own soul. When you and I and each of us are questioned in the grave and on the day of judgment, it will not be possible to point to Trump.
So we are discussing Muslims in the era of Trump. And before I begin specifically with my comments, I want to say firstly two things. One is that I'm going to limit my comments to American Muslims in the age of Trump, and primarily those who are citizens and legal residents, either they be from the so-called indigenous community or the so-called immigrant community. And I use these terms loosely because I don't believe there is a monolithic so-called indigenous American community, nor do I think there is a monolithic so-called immigrant community. Perhaps it may even be closer to, say, urban and suburban Muslim communities, maybe more closer to this current reality, which I will touch upon, inshallah, my beliefs or thoughts on that. The second thing that I would like to just reiterate, which both speakers said before me, is that this issue of Muslims in the era of Donald Trump, which he became president of January 2000 this year, he just did not come from a socio-political vacuum, and there is a history that leads us to the day. But the history that I plan on focusing on more is post 9/11 America, starting from September 11th, 2001 to the day, but even more specifically, the era and time of when Senator Barack Hussein Obama began to run for the presidency of these United States of America until today. Because there are certain things that, as there are certain common characteristics about American society, in general, about certain things, and white supremacy was one of those things that was mentioned, which I will also touch on just a little bit more. And then there was somewhat of a different social-political reality for American Muslims right after the situation that took place in 9/11 in New York and in Washington, D.C. There's some particularities relating to that, but there was also a type of shift of certain overt behaviors and overt discourse that began to accelerate even more as Mr. Barack Hussein Obama announced his presidency, became president, and then we had the whole birther movement, Tea Party movement growing, and then a number of other things, including the expansion of the funding and influence of the so-called Islamophobia network. Which then leads me to primarily what I want to talk about is Islamophobia and how it has affected American Muslims in our psyche, and how it has affected American Muslims somewhat differently from these urban, suburban demographics, but also generationally. And specifically, some of the stark differences in views held by Muslim baby boomers, be they African American, Latino American, immigrants with millennial Muslims.